I'm not going to say professor. I'm going to say Krajka. Krajka, a legend. A person who trained very many of us and commented on what we did and for much more. Who authored numerous articles on computer-assisted language learning, who dealt with computer-assisted language learning long before everybody else, long before it was cool. So Jarek is hipster.
Except for Professor Sipkovic.
Yeah,
because he was the first of us all.
As for Jarek's most read publications, there are two books that most of us know and have read: ELT in the Internet Assisted Environment and The Language Teacher in the Digital Age. So, in addition to this, Jarek is also the editor-in-chief of Teaching English with Technology. Jarek, it's my great pleasure, but the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I understand I have to use the microphone.
No, you don't have to.
I don't have to?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Anya, thank you very much for this very generous introduction. I'm very grateful for that. And I would like to apologize to all of you who presented yesterday especially. I couldn't come because what Anya was supposed to say, and she didn't, is that my most recent achievement is having raised twins almost single-handedly, and that is the reason for my absence yesterday. I was twin-sitting the two boys, the two sick boys. Yes, and one more comment. Anya was very kind pointing out the Teaching English with Technology journal, and this is something I'm particularly proud of because this is, well, it has become quite prestigious in the sense of being included on the ministerial list and having the 10 points grade and having been recently included in Scopus index. But the reason I'm saying that is that we still have very few submissions from Poland, which is quite a shame. We get so many submissions from Iran and Arab countries and very distant places, and we get so few submissions from Poland. So you're really partly encouraged to submit and publish, because this is a Polish journal published in Poland, and I do hope that we'll have much greater share of Polish researchers and Polish publications. In my talk today, I would like to talk slightly more about language and teaching, and perhaps less about computers. You have talked so much about computers, and you have pinpointed a number of interesting technologies and methodologies of using these technologies that I think it is time for me to somehow talk slightly more about language teaching in the computer-assisted language context, of course. Also, I would like to thank the organizers for being ingenious enough to place this plenary as the final event of the conference, because in fact what I'm going to do is take a somewhat holistic view and have a look at different technologies to see how they can actually assist one particular pedagogical purpose, that is empowering teachers with target language awareness, because I also sympathize with Anya, what she said during her lecture, that the pedagogical purpose is primary and technology to be used is secondary. So in my talk, I would like to start with a couple of words about the socio-cultural context of foreign language acquisition, the current state of English and the different challenges and dilemmas that language teachers face. Then a look at the teacher in the classroom, and especially the way of struggling with the native speaker fallacy in the world of today. The third part of my talk will be devoted to what I call computer-assisted EIL instruction, English as an international language, or English in international context instruction, where I will briefly refer to a couple of technologies. You see the abbreviations on the screen. Most probably all of these are familiar to you. If not, they will remain a mystery, at least for a while. And the final part of my talk will be devoted to what is actually done in order to train teachers and equip them with this target language awareness. You have talked a lot, different speakers talked about what should be done with teachers and what teachers should know and what teachers should do in their practice. So perhaps a couple of words about what we actually do in one of the teacher training institutions that I happen to represent. So, if I am to start with a brief talk on the socio-cultural context of language acquisition and the current state of English, I'll start with the motto. The motto of Hutchinson and Walters, which most probably we all fully agree with, that learning can and should be seen in the context in which it takes place. It is a process of negotiation between individuals and society, and the role of the context in which language acquisition takes place is in fact primary. So this of course takes us to the point where we need to reflect on what particular factors contribute to the socio-cultural context of language acquisition. As you can see, Stern came up with a couple of contextual factors where language teaching is seen as a series of circles, concentric circles, where of course the school environment and the home environment and neighborhood have the greatest effect. But on the other hand, all those influences on the geographic level, linguistic level, economic, technological, educational, historical, political, and socio-cultural do play a very important role, and they create the kind of power distance between the cultures, the students' home culture and the target culture that make it possible for them to acquire the target language. So if we think about English, most probably what we witness is some kind of huge spread of English, with English being spoken by almost 2 billion people, with fewer L1 speakers than L2 speakers in countries where it has an official status. We would call these the outer circle countries according to cultural terminology. And what's most importantly, L2 speakers are in turn fewer in number than the 1 billion people learning or using English elsewhere in the world. This of course means that we experience huge differences in expertise of English speakers, huge variety of English spoken between these different groups. At the same time, all those different Englishes are much more available than they used to be due to media, due to social media, due to the internet. This exposure to different Englishes is much greater than it used to be the case. If we remember the traditional view, I was educated in the 1990s when the source of English for myself was the course book. And if I remember myself starting my career as a teacher, I was a very bad teacher when I started my career. Because I taught the English that I learned from the course book that I used as a learner. Okay? It was the pre-internet age, the 1990s, at least in the wild east where I come from, that is in Lublin. Yes, it's still the wild east. So if we compare that to the pictures that we have nowadays, with the increased exposure to materials, to resources, to Englishes, with a much more decentralized picture than it used to be. On the other hand, we face some kind of linguistic reality in Europe, in the United Europe that we are a part of, where of course the supremacy of English is established in institutions, in politics, in various organizations. But on the other hand, we see this supremacy as somewhat controversial, in the sense that people feel protective of their own languages as some kind of symbol of separate national communal identity. I think we no longer hear those slogans in Poland that often, but you might remember such ideas voiced by political parties where the language was actually the way of preserving the identity. So this of course means that English may be seen as some kind of threat to the status, to the integrity of other languages, where all languages are supposed to be equal, but English is obviously more equal than the others, which might mean, of course, that English language teaching is no longer as promising and as cheerful profession as it used to be. Okay? Now, what was the traditional perspective on the selection of language input? Jennifer Jenkins, in her 2009 work, makes the following quote: "The Englishes that are revered and are the goal of teaching and testing in many parts of the world are still native speaker varieties, particularly British and North American. The methodologies and materials that are promoted are still those favoured by the English's native language centres. Communicative approaches with an emphasis on learner autonomy, monolingual textbooks. The teachers who are highly sought after are native speakers of English, and the tests, which are taken most seriously, measure learners' competence in relation to native speaker modes." Most probably, if we think about that, we would still see this as true, at least to some extent. We see that, on the one hand, there is the language, the particular variety that is promoted. On the other hand, we see the methodology which, to some extent, is some kind of reflection of ideology, and the course book that is the package which puts these two elements together. Right? Of course, this view was criticized, the ENL view, that is English as a native language view, as the model of competence and as the criterion of selection of input, was severely criticized for quite a number of reasons. There are more English speakers, there are fewer, so what did I do? I clicked on the wrong thing. There are fewer English language speakers than speakers of English as a second language. The purposes for the use of English are so different that it is difficult to establish some kind of model on the basis of these. There may be speakers in some L2 context, in some EFL context or EFL context, who become as proficient, or perhaps even more proficient, than native speakers of English. And in many contexts, the assumption that British or North American English variety is the natural variety for language teachers and learners to focus on may be not really true. So what is it for the language teacher if we take this landscape into account? One of the phenomena that has appeared is the notion of English as an international language, as some kind of global communication code used for wider communication within multilingual societies. According to its proponents, like Kay for instance, it functions as some kind of international means of communication which loses at least some of its ethnicity, which means that it is no longer owned by native speakers, but so it doesn't really belong to the same extent as the English in the traditional sense to the countries where it is used as a native language, but rather it is used by people representing different cultural backgrounds, and it is connected with the cultures of the target speakers to a much greater extent. Of course, some of the proponents of the approach took it even further, claiming that what we are experiencing is some kind of linguistic imperialism, that's the term of Stevenson, that should be prevented, that should be struggled with, because EIL has no native speakers. As such, we cannot think of it as L1 for individuals who acquire it, right? Of course, I do not want to stress any of these opinions, definitely what's important for us is to reflect on the final point, that is, what is the position of the teacher, the non-native speaker teacher, as far as the EIL and World English is concerned. Okay? Another tendency and another point that was viewed was the English as a lingua franca core, advocated by Jennifer Jenkins among others, which took the idea of internationalizing English and removing it from the native speaker constraints even further, claiming that if we tolerate diversity, then we come up with some kind of reduced core, the English as a lingua franca, which is sufficient for the purpose of communication between non-native speakers in international settings. And that will really be some counterweight to this hegemonic Anglo-American dominated English. Of course, these radical ideas were not really accepted to such an extent as they could be. But still, this of course brings to the fore the notion of the native speaker fallacy, the notion of teacher competence, the notion of teacher language awareness, as we compare native speaker teachers and non-native speaker teachers. Traditionally, we used to think that non-native speaker teachers speak poor English, use bookish language. I started to teach the English that the headway intermediate English and the headway upper intermediate English. I remember the color of the book, I remember the words, and I remember the exact texts, and then I reproduce this kind of input. Yes, perhaps mostly because I wasn't really exposed to some other sources of input that would counterbalance this kind of exposure that I got. On the other hand, as research has shown, non-native speaker teachers are claimed to have more insight and better metacognitive knowledge of grammar because of their educational background and training. So, in other words, we come to the point where we need to establish the notion of target language awareness. Target language awareness, which is composed of three components: the knowledge of language, the language proficiency, the knowledge about language, the declarative knowledge of subject matter, and the knowledge of students. Students with their lacks, needs, problems, the cognitive knowledge of learners as it relates to subject matter. Another problem that appears is, of course, the notion of standards. In my own teaching, the headway upper intermediate was the standard for myself, right? If we think about the teaching world nowadays, it is much more often the case that the actual textbook that the teacher uses is not a standard and a model. Yes? Students are exposed to so many different sources of input, to films with subtitles of very different quality. You most probably see how much the subtitles produced by volunteering translators can differ in quality. That we need to come to the point to establish some kind of standard, or at least to think about standards. McKay shows a number of options that we could go for in this very complicated landscape. Of course, teaching standard English, by definition British English, at least in Holland, or at least in Lublin where I was educated, was the traditional option. Perhaps another option would be to define a form of international English and teach that. Yes? Most probably quite difficult to accomplish for a non-native speaker teacher. David Crystal and David Gregor advocated the third option, that is, offer a range of Englishes in the classroom, especially in the receptive mode. Yes? It's not really the question of encouraging your students to speak Hawaiian English, but exposing students to world Englishes in the receptive mode has become very important. If I remember, another experience of mine was introducing the new Matura in the year 2002. And if I remember the huge shock that was experienced by students by the fact that they were exposed during the advanced level to non-standard varieties of English. And if you compare matura, where the only variety, or the major variety of English that students were exposed to was the teacher English, because if you remember the old matura, it was the teacher who would read the script. The same, for instance, the same teacher who would teach those students for a couple of years. Then obviously this has been a huge change, right? If we think about teachers and the problems they may face in this linguistic landscape, then of course the language-related issues are those that I was reflecting upon. How to choose a language norm for the class and against what to assess students. Our classrooms are no longer as homogeneous as they used to be. And the question of norm, if you start to have immigrant children, if you start to have refugee children and students of very different backgrounds, may be really a valid one. But of course, it's not only about language. So far I was talking about language mainly. But if we think about language teaching of today, that's also the question of EIC, that is English in international context, teaching English to students coming from very different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, which of course means that we have to reflect also on some other issues, just as the Slotska pinpoints it. Methodology-related issues would refer to, for instance, the ways of presentation of material. Even such seemingly trivial things, such as vocabulary presentation or grammar presentation, may be culturally dependent and may matter, may be regarded in culture in terms of culture of target students. Personality-related issues, the possibility of teacher-student relations or student-student relations, if the composition of the classroom is very different. So these may be the issues of organizing work, what kind of responses to be expected. And finally, culture-related issues, how to encompass learners from very different cultural backgrounds in such mixed ethnic classes. I talked a bit about course books. I said that a course book is some kind of package, final package of that represents a number of decisions on the methodology, on the philosophy of learning and teaching that are usually not really specified. And Brown encourages us also to consider teaching activities and teaching resources in terms of the cultural sensitivity or cultural suitability. You can see some of the control questions here. The issues of values, belief systems, stereotypes, devaluing students' native languages, varying degree of willingness of students to participate, perceived roles of males and females in the cultures, as well as background experience of students with their own experiences in their own cultures. Right? So we come to the point when we could ask the major question, what can we do in order to help the language teacher of today? How can technology help? How can computer-assisted instruction help? Where are we in terms of call, and what particular purposes for call are there in this highly complicated landscape? You all know that. You all know Warshauer's 2000 classification of stages of call, and we all know that we are most probably still in the interpretive call phase according to Warshauer, which means that the main purpose for the use of computers is to provide authentic discourse according to the socio-cognitive paradigm of language. Then we all know this as well. Sorry about small print. That's Banks's 2003 classification or criticism of Warshauer's typology, taxonomy, where Banks claims that we should not really talk about stages, but rather we should talk about purposes, different purposes for technology use that could be used alongside one another. Obviously, if we think about restricted call, if we think about the drilling and such activities as text reconstruction or answering close-ended questions, we see much less of this kind of instruction. But still, in some areas, for teaching some areas of language, we should not underestimate the importance. Bax claimed that integrated whole is the phase in which we have frequent interaction with other students and some interaction with computer through the lesson. And Bax claimed that technology should be normalized. Normalized, that is invisible. Invisible in the sense that we do not really make a focus of that, but rather we try to use it in some kind of invisible way for the purposes, for pedagogical purposes that we have. And of course, if I think about different purposes for the use of call in FLT that we have witnessed throughout the years, especially if we compare the first generation internet stage and the second generation internet stage, we remember how we used to call for motivation only. We remember the wow factor. We remember the novelty factor, right? We used to call for provision of teaching materials, also because the exposure to quality, authentic input was not as rich as we would expect it to be. Nowadays, most probably experience much more use of call for social networking. And my point is that we should experience much greater use of call for teacher empowerment. If we see how fuzzy and how difficult the teaching landscape is, then we need to seek ways of equipping the teacher with some tools to be empowered in terms of establishing target language awareness. Obviously, there are very different technologies and very different studies that show both Internet 1.0 tools such as treasure hunts or emails, virtual discussion forums, web-based bulletin boards, as well as much more recent ones. We have seen very successful workshop or we have not seen, but we regret we have not seen a successful workshop on virtual worlds, or video annotation tools or video editing tools. My personal selection is the following. If I think about target language awareness, and if I think about EIL and the Englishes in the classroom, and if I think about the non-native speaker teacher just as myself, trying to make sense of all that and produce some kind of standard for teaching, the starting point is, of course, DDL for me, data-driven learning, especially with its more recent developments, together with do-it-yourself corpus compilation. Of course, if I think about developing teacher skills to teach in international context, I think about telecollaboration, especially telecollaboration 2.0 in terms of multimedia, collaborative authoring. Of course, I still see much room for Web 1.0 applications for internet activity formats. And I see quite a lot of use of text-to-speech synthesis. So I will try to review at least some of these. I know these are most probably familiar to you. I will perhaps refer to some of the studies that I have conducted over the years. If we think about the inventory, the language teachers inventory, most probably we would all agree that corpus consultation should be a part of teacher strategy training, and of course, as a result, learner strategy training on a par with dictionary consultation. If we think about the picture of English as I have tried to outline at the beginning, then of course, on the one hand, teachers as consumers of ready-made products, consultation of ready-made corpora, as well as teachers as authors of customized learning solutions, personal compilations, using one of the many sources that we can see, would be quite useful. If we think about native speaker texts, then of course extracting meanings, described words, studying general context, immediate collocates, and also investigating range of vocabulary or lexical density would be some of the purposes for building teacher awareness and learner awareness. If you think about learner texts, on the other hand, extracting most common misuses, most common inappropriate uses, certain problems, characteristic problems, and exposing L1 interference most of all will be something that you could go for as well. If we think about approaches to data-driven learning, we have the two basic approaches, either the soft version or the hard version. To what extent do we really expect our learners to be immersed in the process? Really? 27 minutes.
If you want the discussion.
Okay. I'll try to speed up a bit. Or the hard version, that is students using Corpora on their own. Then of course we could go for one or the other, or perhaps both, depending on what kind of exposure we expect our students to get. The materials and the resources, especially the global web-based English corpus, which we can see a massive corpus of almost 2 billion words, with subcorpora from different countries where English is spoken as the official language, would be quite useful to have a look at. Obviously, corpus tools in their interface are not as user-friendly as we might expect. So that's why do-it-yourself concordancing together with very simple tools such as TextStat, most probably you all know this, a very simple interface but very effective in terms of extracting uses and concordancing for learner purposes. If I think about telecollaboration, obviously there are some recent projects, the Internet project that Gosia was a proud member of, that showed much greater need for the use of telecollaboration, especially in terms of using multilingual speakers and going outside Europe and the USA. These are of course the arguments that call for the use of this particular framework in teacher training as well as in learner-based instruction. If we think about telecollaboration, then of course various designs may come into play. The question of how many cultures do we expect in the project, how distant are those cultures to be in terms of the power distance between cultures, as is defined by Schumann, for instance. We could think about competence matching or competence lacking. Do we expect the perfect fit? That is, we want to try to find as close partners as possible in terms of age, in terms of proficiency level, in terms of professional competence level, in terms of interests, etc. So that it's only the culture that creates the gap. Or perhaps on the contrary, we create some purposeful competence gap apart from the culture gap that will inevitably be there. I conducted two such studies. One, the perfect fit, involved Polish student teachers, in fact, and Turkish student teachers who were exactly at the same point of professional development. They have completed their practicum, and the purpose of the project was to confront the experiences, the practicum experiences, the observations, the lesson plans created and stuff, right? Where we use video blogs, discussion lists, individual diary entries, collaborative glossary, etc. The other model that we used for building target language awareness and international EIL skills of teachers was the one where there were no international students, but there were international contexts. We had Polish student teachers and we had Polish teaching assistants, but the teaching assistants were actually at the moment in some distant places such as Turkey, Colombia, France, former students of mine who really needed help, and sometimes they made pleas for help because they were placed somewhere in Colombia with a course book that the students didn't understand, and they just found it hard to teach, right? So that was an interesting opportunity to get this kind of wider perspective on the language that is to be taught on the linguistic side, as well as on the methodology and the materials. Those three aspects that that are inevitable, that need to be inevitably put together. Of course, if you think about collaboration, telecollaboration, there are various technologies that could be used to mediate that. And of course, we have seen quite a number of successful studies in quite a few of these. What's interesting, especially interesting for me nowadays, if I think about the linguistic aspect and the argument that I'm trying to build, is the final one, that is collaborative multimedia authoring, especially in terms of captioning, as I call it, social captioning or subtitle authoring, as some kind of most recent development. Social captioning is a form of adding captions to videos, videos that are submitted by users, captions that are submitted by users as well, where of course the social aspect is not only about commenting, but the social aspect is also about taking and completing or perhaps improving other users' captions. There are quite a lot of reasons for the use of captioning in language acquisition. And of course, I would not like to go into detail in terms of the language benefits. What's most important for us is perhaps the last point, that is cognitive benefits and depth of processing that could be involved in the process. And if you think about these two aspects, that is telecollaboration on the one hand and captioning, social captioning on the other, then of course we could follow different models, similar to the hard and soft approach of DDL. We could think about teacher sub, class sub, or autonomous sub models, in which, depending on the expected contribution of students, we could follow for some of these. Ella Gajek some time ago reflected on captioning for language acquisition, and she came up with a number of different language combinations. Of course, L1 and L2, in the context of my main point that I'm trying to make, might not necessarily be separate languages, but perhaps the same language or the different regional varieties that would have to be exposed. And finally, if we think about captioning and social captioning in the classroom, we could draw a nice parallel with video viewing techniques. In other words, we could reflect what is it that we actually choose for this textual, visual textual channel, rather than full text subtitles, thinking in terms of keywords, gaps, or perhaps manipulating subtitle times, so that we create some kind of information gap, competence gap that would have to be tackled. And the final two technologies that I would like to introduce here is, of course, TTS, text to speech. We all know Ivona. Ivona used to be Polish. Now she's Amazon, yes? But if you look at the very basic demo of Ivona, and if you look at the number of different voices, then of course it's a must to take this as a starting point for world Englishes. If we think about that, if we couple TTS with audio editing and different audio editing opportunities that software such as Audacity presents to us, then of course we might come up with nice materials exposing students to some of the characteristic issues in terms of the pronunciation of English, international English or lingua franca English. And finally, good old internet activity formats. I'm reviewing these because in terms of awareness building, in terms of discovery learning, in terms of gaining the metacognitive competence or metacognitive strategies, most probably treasure hunts, Ask an Expert activities, and web quests, talent quests, or EAP quests are quite uncoupled. Anya left, but most probably I do not have the time for the final part. But if Anya is not here, perhaps I can just very quickly review it. The final part was supposed to show to you how this particular aspect is tackled in one institution where I am employed, that is University of Social Sciences and Humanities in Warsaw, where we try to deal with different learning outcomes of the EIL landscape spread across the curriculum in different classes. That's the MA curriculum for student teachers, the teacher training curriculum, and our students are quite lucky to have separate subjects for those separate areas of language teaching and language analysis. They are quite unlucky that due to a small number of groups, they all have those classes with myself. Perhaps they are lucky, perhaps I am lucky that I teach all of these subjects one after another as they are shown, so that I can really intersperse the elements of international English, teaching English as an international language across these. But what I would like to show to you is that if we have such a structure, then of course we can intersperse the elements, introduce particular technologies in different parts of the curriculum so that they help us accomplish particular pedagogical purposes. And if Anya is back, I am just getting to the final slide, which is showing how the blended TEIL program is actually, what shape it actually takes. As you can see, all of the technologies I was talking about interspersed across the curriculum in specific subjects, trying to build teacher awareness, teacher skills, both of the linguistic aspect and of the methodological aspect. Anya, I have just finished. Thank you very much.
My well-earned reputation is nothing here. Just a comment before I ask for questions. You see a clear demarcation line in the realm of Englishes, which is age-related, because in all the variety, Headway English is one variety spoken by the younger, and the Alexander English is another variety spoken by the older.
That was the primary school variety. Headway was the secondary school variety.
Do you have any questions or comments?
It's good you don't say Januszewski's English. What was it? The 60s? The 60s, I guess. Or early 70s, most probably, yes. Mm-hmm.
Any questions or comments?
I can't, because I'm a morally wrong agent of linguistic imperialism, so whatever I say now is going to sound peculiar, so I decided not to say anything. Actually, no, I have a question.
Your true nature is a question asker.
This is a rather neutral question, not talking about taking sides or approaches. When you talked about collaboration, I don't remember which slide, I can't give you the number, but he said that making a decision whether to encourage a monocultural, a bicultural, a multicultural group, exchange, collaboration. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? My tentative, very tentative, idea would be that perhaps it makes sense to go slowly with bicultural before, going into multicultural, especially in this country. it will still be an eye-opener.
True.
Or am I completely wrong?
Yeah, true. Well, you
Also, you avoid certain problems of, I don't know, offending the others. So
Well, true. You can't have too many variables, yes? Too many gaps. You can't create too many gaps. However, the Polish-Turkish project, where we tried to find a perfect match, made me think it was not as successful as I wanted it to be. Why? Because there was little difference between the partners, yes? In the sense that they all had similar level of experience, or in fact, inexperience, yes? They were in their MA programs, and I expected some kind of nice discussions on the teaching techniques used and, reflection on lesson plan designs and stuff, and they were on a similar level of inexperience. So what we did in the second study was to create this kind of competence gap, where student teachers were teamed up with teachers. Polish student teachers are preparing ESP digital materials for English for specific purposes, were teamed up with teachers from Slovenia who were actual ESP teachers in the domains that those digital materials were created in. Yes? So the assumption was that because students might not have this kind of experience, will not have this kind of experience, we need to find partners who do have this kind of experience, who can take the materials and really evaluate them, yes, to see to what extent they are useful in the study. And that study, the design was quite promising. Of course, it needs a longer time span, yes, and it's much more asynchronous than we can expect it. So that's why I would need to repeat this design, making certain changes. But this is the line of reasoning. Okay, let's try to find the gap that perhaps will give us the answer to the question that we didn't get in the previous class. All right. But true, I agree with you that we have to be careful with the number of variables that we have across the partners. Yes.
We have a colleague at work who has been running courses on, say, broadly intercultural communication, and she uses or utilizes, or whatever you call it, I'm always politically incorrect, so whatever you say, students from Erasmus exchanges, where they talk about their own experiences, their own cultures, countries, beliefs, you name it, right? And then she says that she always enjoys having the wider variety, because these again act as eye-openers for our Polish teacher trainers. Also in the context that you mentioned, that they then go and teach abroad, right? But then they also observed something like this, the Erasmus students. They said, we don't want you to think too much about us, because then we don't learn about you, right? Like, there is one substantial difference that I personally was totally unaware of, and I admit that I'm not the kind of teacher who sits behind this desk, doesn't move, and just distributes or transmits knowledge. I'm everywhere. And apparently this is very offensive for the Spanish students. I was pointed at when I was teaching in Spain. In Spain and in Turkish
in Istanbul.
In Istanbul the same. But Spaniards of all people, the Mediterraneans, the Southerners, right? And then I said, okay, so what do I do when they come to my class? And they said, they adjust. They like it. They want to see other things. And then they go back home and they are perfectly happy with you being there and them being here.
Yes, exactly. So that was something that I was trying to show here, that we focus on the linguistic part of it, yes? But there is the methodology, there are personality-related issues, yes? And we no longer train Polish teachers of English, teaching English to Polish students of English, as we used to do a couple of years ago. Some of the recent developments, one of my students, being Polish, went to Belgium to teach English in French two students who were Belgian citizens, but none of them was Belgian by origin because they all came from very different countries of Africa. Yes? And that's a huge linguistic cultural diversity that people will increasingly face. Yes? So tolerance for diversity, sensitivity, cultural sensitivity in terms of methodology, in terms of materials, and in terms of language. These are the three spheres that I think is becoming more and more important. Thank you. Thank you for the comments.